Hello and welcome to our amazing session focusing Seagull Books. And I'm pleased to welcome Sunandini Banerjee and Bishan Samaddar. I hope I've pronounced.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, and Naveen Kishore as well.
Thank you for having all of us.
It's a pleasure, truly a pleasure, and I've been looking forward to having this conversation. So Nandini, if we could begin with you introducing yourself.
Okay, that will be relatively short and sweet. I'm now the senior editor at Seagull Books. And I'm also the person who designs all the covers. So I suppose you could also call me the senior graphic designer. My trajectory has been quite interesting and I think unexpected. To at least myself, because I have a degree in English literature from Jadavpur University in Calcutta. And many years ago, I joined Seagull primarily as a junior editor because, you know, my language skills were there and I was very interested in publishing. And I just don't have any art training at all. I didn't know I could, you know, do any graphic design at all. But the sort of, you know, the wonderful aura of freedom that inhabits the Seagull space encourages people to try, you know, new things, even if you're not necessarily sort of qualified to do them. So I just, you know, I was 23 or 24 and I was terribly enthusiastic about everything. And I thought, I want to edit. I also want to typeset. I don't want to just stay, you know, restricted to just the pure editorial because it was all happening around me. You know, Naveen was doing the typesetting, printers were coming with, you know, proofs. And I wanted to be involved in all the sort of stages of it. So Naveen, you know, who used to do all the design in those days, was generous enough to kind of pick up on my enthusiasm really and just say, okay, try it, you know, try your hand at it. And so I kind of learned it on the job, you know, while watching, observing, and really just not knowing when to stop, quite honestly. So now I edit and I do all of the covers and the catalog at Seagull. So that's who I am.
Wow, that's amazing. Bishan, if you could introduce yourself. You're on the mute.
Oh, mute.
Sorry. Thank you for having me. I am an editor at Seagull Books. I joined Seagull 13 years ago, and I've been not just editing books, but I look into several other things in the publishing house, from some, you know, doing contracts to doing page layouts. And I also teach at the Seagull School of Publishing. I've been doing that also for quite a few years now, just like Sunandini. Well, yeah, that's about
You're
it.
also the series editor for the Pride list.
I do some. We've been commissioning some books as well, acquiring some rights. That's just in the nascent stage still, but yeah, basically editing.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's not basically editing. And of course, I'm not going to let go of you, Naveen. So if you could tell us about yourself. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
For putting you.
I mean, I'm by sheer default the publisher, having sort of plunged into the business of publishing way back in 1982. I think this is going to be our 39, no, gosh, yes, I think 39th year, if I have the math right. And we started as arts publishers, as in theater, film, slightly off the beaten track, fine art books and that kind of stuff, which then later slowly grew into what you see today, which is translated literature from all over the world. And we've always seen ourselves as publishers who happen to be located in Calcutta in terms of physical space and work. But we also believe in the fact that there are very few boundaries in publishing in today's world if you practice publishing in that sort of way. So we tend to buy and sell all over the world. We don't see ourselves necessarily as either Indian or Japanese or British or American, just publishers.
Thank you for that. So I'll just jump right into it. And Sunandini, if you can start with the Seagull story. And Naveen and I spoke about it, how to upset and I'm reading this because that was our conversation, how to upset the status quo about the notions of who gets to publish and what. So
well, I think, the first chapter of the story is what Naveen has, just mentioned just now, which is that, he started it in 1982. One of, the primary focus was a lot on sort of theater, cinema. A lot was happening in that time, in sort of, especially the sort of national language theaters of India. And because we have so many different languages, none of us could read, the other person's play scripts unless they were translated into English. So I think the interesting thread that runs through the Seagull story is its interest in translation, right? So earlier in the sort of earlier chapter when we were doing the books, we had the selected works of Mahashweta Devi, for example, which is, like really a cornerstone of our translation project. Her work, she was the sort of brilliant, incredible activist writer who wrote across age groups, but really represented the marginalized in India, especially those who were fighting to save the forests. She went and actually lived with them. It was all very firsthand that she then turned into fiction. So early years, that was one big project. Another project was a project called the New Indian Playwrights, where theater scripts from across the country were translated into English, so that, English was our link language. It still is, so that we could read each other's work. And then it kind of evolved into another wonderful turning point around 2005, when Naveen kind of, we were getting so frustrated with trying to find distribution in the West for our books. Publisher friends in the West would meet us. They would say, your books are so lovely, but they should be available for a larger audience. Why aren't they kind of out there? And you have to remember that this was happening when, the internet was not as kind of ubiquitous, as it is now. So it was not so easy to then have a website, sell your books and so on. So Naveen came up with the idea that he started a company called Seagull Books London Limited. But it's interesting because it's registered there. We pay our taxes, we have an accountant, we have a lawyer, we have all our paperwork, we submit our accounts. But all the work still happens. The think tank, the activity tank is still Calcutta. But what it enables you to do is it enables you to earn in a foreign currency, and it enables you to play the game as a publisher in the West, in a sense, right? And so it enables you to get distribution for a London company rather than getting distribution for an Indian company, which even in those days used to be fairly complicated. Because we were certain that we don't want to co-publish. We want to make beautiful books, and we want to make them available to the world, at least as much of the English-speaking world as we can access. So therefore, we started Seagull Books London Limited. Initially, we had a few of our older, very classic titles, which we kind of repackaged and we sent out. But we wanted to do something else that Naveen felt very strongly about, and which is that internationally, a lot of translated literature was disappearing from the shelves. It was expensive. It is, still expensive. A lot of the university presses had also undergone, shifts in structure. The money targets were different. There was a lot of emphasis, there is still, on, a book you do now must recover the money now, and then you kind of move on, as opposed to the older idea that some books do better, they support the other more slow selling books and so on. So he decided to then acquire world English language rights for a lot of, we began with German literature, we began with French literature. Even in translation, even in India, we were familiar with, a lot of the names that we had read and admired. So we began with some classics. So, you know, we started off with Jean-Paul Sartre's entire collection of essays in the way that he had dreamt them and arranged them. We had Theodor Adorno, you know, from the German. So we started with some of these classics. We approached these publishers, and it took a while because they were a bit confused with why, you know, why do you in Calcutta want to do Jean-Paul Sartre for India? And then we would say, no, 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 you know, this is a different, it's a kind of experiment, but we want to do it for the world. Everywhere that English is spoken, we have distribution, and we would like this book to be available. And it's interesting because we sell in the US, you know, we sell in the UK and a lot of other English-speaking zones, but the books are subsidized in India because they are also available in India. If we did a direct price conversion, it would not be affordable in the Indian market. So we recognize that we are lucky to be earning in foreign currencies, and therefore the Indian market should have, you know, a subsidized price. And suddenly a lot of, you know, it took time, but I think in a very kind of quiet way, we were responsible for a little bit of the resurgence in the interest in, you know, translated literature. Definitely, we've seen more small presses start up. You know, people are returning to translated literature in a wonderful way. It's regaining its place on the bookshelves. And we do also, interestingly enough, we do one edition for the world. You know, we don't change the covers. We've heard a lot about the fact that the US likes one kind of cover or the UK likes something else, but we don't. We just have one book, one edition, one print run, and then the stocks get, you know, divided across the territories. And I think this really has not been done by anybody else. You know, you have large publishers that have branches in different territories. And sometimes they, you know, give their books to each other to sell from the US to the UK or so on. But we're a small publishing house, 5 people in Calcutta, publishing literature from across the globe, because now we have an Africa list, we have a Hungarian list, you know, we have an Arab list, India, of course, you know, German, French, of course. But it's worked, you know, and we are not dependent on the West giving us literature in India, because that's the direction that we were dependent on, that, you know, America has to translate something and then it comes into India, if you're lucky. So yes, so I think that is really the more revolutionary move that we made, that this, you know, keeping our size small, keeping the eclectic, very personal taste and aesthetic intact. We are a global publisher, you know, from Calcutta.
So keeping that spirit intact and, you know, saying that you're small, what have been some of the challenges, you know, especially because, you know, if you're, you know, you have to keep your spirit intact. I think that is really core to, you know, one's branding and identity. So what have been the challenges?
I think one challenge is the system of bookselling right now, which is that we are a publisher that believes in building lists, you know, so we do books very ideologically and very sort of wistfully speaking, we do books for a lifetime, you know, books that will probably outlast us, and they should. Unfortunately, the way bookselling is, the way the pressures are on the bookseller, because obviously you can imagine that the volumes of books, you know, being published have gigantically increased. No bookshop is big enough, and there's not just us, you know, there's so many fabulous books coming out all the time. So the pressure has been that only the newest new books get to be on the bookshelves, and your old ones visibly disappear, right? So that sometimes frustrates us, because we have such great books in the backlist, but the system of ordering is such that except for a few classics, you're not really allowed, you know, to bring them somehow back unless you repackage them or re-announce them as a paperback and so on. So sometimes you wish someone would, you know, that the booksellers had time to kind of occasionally call back, you know, older titles. They do, but only if the writer wins an award or, you know, something like that happens. So I resent the fact that, you know, books are not given more time, because the system has changed. And books, in fact, in many stores compete with a lot of other things. So a lot of the fabulous books that you do, they get only 6 to 7 months of visibility, and then it's up to a reader to locate them, you know, get to your website, do their own detective work, as it were. So you're kind of left to chance a little bit. And I think sometimes the other challenge for us is sometimes the geographic distance can be a bit of a problem. You know, suddenly a book runs out and you wish you could just zip down some, you know, in the courier. You can, but it's terribly expensive. So you kind of suffer from a bit of a lag and say, no, let's be practical. What can we do? We come up with creative solutions all the time. But it's, I think that, you know, the frustration, and it's not just with the West, for, you know, the whole book selling system has changed. Even in India, you know, all the time, some bookshops are hanging in there. So many have gone out of business, for example, especially this last year has been really difficult. And bookshops are our face, you know, they are our connection, they are our outlet. So if they start to disappear, it's hard, it's very heartbreaking. And of course, it affects revenue.
True, true. Did you have something to say, Sunandini?
I was just going to say that, you know, it's, people are buying online, you know, and we're terribly grateful. They're making their way to our website. You know, we are also constantly monitoring our website, you know, thinking of attractive deals and things. But I think there really also is, for the kind of unusual books that we do, there is no substitute to the browsing. You know, you kind of get attracted to it, you pick it up. It's often an author you haven't heard of, but you read a few lines, you know, you like it, and then you buy it. So it's, the times now are even more challenging, but we're trying.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you on that, because, you know, when I was young, when I was in the university, you know, going inside the library, surrounded by books, and that smell of those books,
Absolutely,
maybe
yes.
weird
Yeah.
saying that, but, you know, the smell of the book and the feel and the texture, you know, it adds to that. Naveen, if you have something to add to that?
No, I mean, it's nice for me to listen to everything, because I'm at a stage when I've completely forgotten the earlier story. But yeah, none of this is fine. I mean, the sense that she's put it very elegantly and eloquently.
Have you gone on mute, Sabin? I can't hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's better.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, not at all.
So what I wanted to ask, you know, we were talking about translations, and a big part of this festival is around globalizing literature by women through translation. So in a session before this, we had Women's Voices Lost in Translation panel. And one of the panelists talked about, you know, these amazing translated works. And I've got this huge treasure trove of books that belong to my grandfather. These are like 80 years old, and they're from Progress Publishers in Russia. And not one of them, you know, I've got Turgenev, I've got Chekhov, I've got Pushkin, I've got Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Gorky, but I don't have any woman. So you're a publishing house. So tell me how you are approaching, you know, how do we need to globalize women in literature through translation, and what is Seagull's part in this?
Well, I think, I mean, we have, you know, we began our sort of, if you think of the sort of the fiction aspect, you know, the sort of novels and novellas and short stories, our major commitment began with Mahashweta Devi, who was, you know, and that commitment began in the early 80s, much before either translation was in fashion or women. I don't think women will ever be in fashion. Women will be the fashion. But, you know, so we began very intuitively with the recognition that translation is essential to understanding the world. and that here was a magnificent woman fighter, writer, who sometimes wrote despite very real battles that she was fighting, both personally and on behalf of people who couldn't fight. It was also in recognition of the tremendous literature that she had produced, because even the quality of the writing, one doesn't do Mahashweta because she's an activist. One does Mahashweta because she's also an activist. I mean, her literature and the quality of her literary output is quite astonishing. She was remarkably versatile. And I think that has stayed with us. I think we haven't ever drifted away from it. It is now that the time has come for issues like this to get a sort of talking space. Once upon a time, no one spoke about these things. So we are always looking at interesting literature. Our priority remains interesting literature, books that just need to be out there. And yes, we are making a concerted effort to kind of, equal the numbers. On our authors, we've just done a whole calendar full, celebrating our women authors. You put it on your desk and there's a book by a woman author every month. We do great emailers. But aside from all that, I think we have been very lucky because our translators are mostly some incredible, wonderful women from all over the world, from all over age groups. So it's not enough to only look at the people you are translating, but also who you are using to translate, right? So in that, we have again been very lucky. And it is, you make the effort. If you talk about globalizing women in translation, it's not going to just happen by itself. Everyone has to make a concerted effort. And you have to remember that in globalizing translation, we will be dependent on looking at languages. So those languages have to prioritize women, right? So if I'm looking for literature in Bengali by Bengali women, the Bengali publishers have to be seeking out women in the first place. They have to be giving them voices. Then I pick them up for translation. So it has to be a very deep-rooted attitudinal change. And this, of course, also leads to the fact, especially in a country like India, women have to then be able to write the stories they want to write, which means they have to be allowed to go to school. They have to be given education, and in some cases, they have to be allowed to be born. Right? So it begins much, much early on in a kind of overall attitude reset that women are people too.
Absolutely. And coming over to this new industrial age of technology, how is the traditional way of publishing evolving, or is it joining the bandwagon?
Well, I think we've been on the technology boat for a while, in the sense that, we've kind of a lot of the pre-press, as we call it, the sort of the typesetting, the composing, the artworking, as we would call it, a lot of it. I mean, I joined in 2000. And by then, I think it was already 50-50, computer and hand. They were sort of coexisting, the old and the new. And now, for those of us who can afford computers and softwares and so on, it's entirely, on the computer. So in fact, today we were talking at the Seagull School of Publishing, or I think it was yesterday, and I said that, whatever you want to be, especially those who are contemplating being designers, sort of cover designers. And I said, look, you have to interact with the computer at some point, right? No matter how, you can take a beautiful photograph, you can do the most incredible painting, but then you have to scan it, and you have to get it as a file on the computer, and then you have to put your typeface on it. So I think we're already in the production of it, we are already deeply enmeshed, and we've caught up so much so that I think a lot of the softwares respond to the publishing industry and kind of, tweak and tailor make their softwares to keep up. So there was a revolutionary moment a few years ago when a software that we use called Quark Express finally caught up and gave us automated footnotes, and my joy was beyond, kind of any bounds known to man. In the other end, after the sort of production end, I think ebooks are there very much. What actually excites me more than the ebook, because the ebook, quite honestly, is just a different medium on which to read your content, right? And I think we've all kind of calmed down about the threat of the ebook, to the print book, and we've discovered that they can just coexist. It's now more a courtesy that you offer your reader, that do you want to read it in print, do you want to read it while you travel or commute or whatever. But I think what is kind of more exciting for me is not something that I see too much, and we would like, at least I would like to kind of experiment with it more, which is a book that's more an app, really. So you springboard, from the print, but then you make an app book which is mobile, which has moving pictures, it has text, it has music, so it becomes a kind of immersive experience. Not every book, to be fair, is, open to this kind of interpretation. But that kind of thing excites me, that you start from print and then you can have a kind of almost like a multimedia experience. And I've seen some examples of that, and that's very, very exciting.
Something like augmented reality.
Yeah, that, all kinds, you can embed things, one thing can lead to another. So you kind of have a reading experience, but it's sort of suddenly like being literally immersed, in the book. There was, I think, a Ray Bradbury story like this I'd read a long time ago, and it stayed with me. So I find that more interesting. I find it good that people who can afford devices, or even on their phone, that they have the option now to be able to read, when they want, wherever they want. I think that's a good thing for all of us, because no matter what, it is still content. I don't fuss about what and how people like to read. I think my main concern is people should carry on reading, read more, and sort of spread the joy of reading. I don't care whether it's a hardback or a paperback or whatever. So I think the publishing industry is very much, a lot of digital drawing, for example, you see on book covers, and I know that a lot of cover designers use those tablets, using iPads, using apps. We're always messing around with Photoshop, for example. Even if it's amusing, because sometimes if you're trying to create a vintage look or a retro look, but it's done today on the computer, so I sometimes find that sort of very ironic as well. But I think the publishing industry on the whole, for those of us who are privileged enough to be able to afford it, we are very much hand in hand with technology. There's no way out. There's no escaping it. And I think it's a good friend. I think you have to be, with any good friend, you have to know your boundaries and kind of have healthy respect for it. But it makes a lot of things possible.
Absolutely. So one quick question, and then we'll move on to another absolutely enthralling subject. I find it enthralling, and I'm sure all my viewers, not readers, viewers are want to know that. But what exactly does a publisher want in a book? I know I hope it's not a prosaic question, but
I think a publisher wants the kind of book that makes them feel that they're reading a story for the first time. Because we've used up effectively all the words. We have used up all the stories. We are just writing variations effectively. But depending on how it's written, depending on the perspective, depending on the way in which the writer uses the words, you read something and you feel that I have not read anything before this, and that is the magical quality. So if something can move you that way, then you realize that, yes, this is it. There is something here that is new. There is something here that the larger story may have been told before, but not quite in this way, right? So in that sort of shifting kaleidoscope, it's one more color that gets added. And I think there is no formula, there is nothing, we can't tell you it must be so long, it must be so short. it must be about this or it must be about that. That's bullshit. If you look at a lot of the books that have endured as classics, then no publisher would have really asked for those books, right? There is no publisher that could have commissioned such a story. So it is just the novelty of the expression, you know. Sometimes it can be the length, sometimes it can be the brevity of it. It's just that interesting aspect that makes you essentially and ultimately marvel, right? At the world and at the fact that such a point of view existed and you didn't know it before. And then, of course, you get into the marketing part of it and, you know, the selling part of it and how can we do this? Can we pitch it at all? And so on and so forth. But I think that there's a gut level recognition of something that is larger than you. And that you have, you know, that you feel privileged to have been let into it. So I think it sounds very romantic, but I think it is essentially romantic, or a romantic, entirely privileged, completely deluded exercise. If you see what is happening in the world around you, then sometimes you feel like a charlatan for sitting in a room and making books. But then if you don't put the ideas out there, and what is going to change the world, right? So that's why you do it, because it all adds up. So I don't think, often I know a lot of people these days are very obsessed with the idea of writing programs and, you know, kind of learning to write. And I have nothing against them, but I have to say that as a publisher, we can spot people who've been to writing programs and who haven't in a lot of cases, because there's a kind of homogeneity of styles, you know, that comes, or sentences must begin in a certain way, chapters must begin on a high note, they must end on a high note. And I don't think that we're looking for, at least at Seagull, we're not looking for formulas. You know, we're looking for something that makes you feel, I didn't know this was possible. You know, that the world can be like this as well.
So another question.
Hello.
Yeah. So it's a question that we've been asking writers and translators, and I feel it would be unfair if I don't ask you as a publisher, because we have another panel called Editors as Enablers.
Okay.
Now so what I want to ask is, are editors and publishers enablers of the literary world?
Absolutely.
Or gatekeepers?
I think they are meant to be enablers. I think they should be enablers. I think they have become gatekeepers because they have over-exaggerated their importance and misread their role. And I think the sort of the pursuit of, in many cases, the pursuit of the market and that whole publishing policy that I was, talking about earlier with regard to the bookshops, like you have to do a book now, and you have to sell it now. You have 6 months, sell it, make it the biggest thing possible, recover your costs, make a profit, and then forget about it, right? So if you're looking at a book as a momentary gimmick, right? If you're looking at a book at a momentary sensation that will last all of 6 months and bring you immense fame and fortune, then you're in trouble. Then you become gatekeepers. If you're looking at books that will be good, that people will circle back to over time, a book that will retain its value over time, right? Why are we still reading T.S. Eliot? Why are we still reading Virginia Woolf? Whether we are in India or elsewhere. So if you're looking to make that kind of book, the kind of book that will kind of carry on, beyond you, continue to have relevance, generations will find there were, some sense in it or some beauty in it. If you're looking at that kind of publishing, then you can't be a gatekeeper, right? But if you're looking at a different kind, then you want to keep a lot of stuff out and you only want to let in the kind of stuff that's going to have a very quick turnaround, that's going to have a very quick impact, and you don't really care whether it lasts for very long or not. Hence the filters in publishing, and of course, a lot of other politics, race politics, caste politics. I mean, in India, there's, only certain classes got to read and write, only certain castes got to read and write. And for generations, we've hogged the limelight because we just could. We don't stop to think about it, but we have effectively disabled at once, at one time, and that tradition continues. We literally disabled large parts of the population from getting an education because we said, no, it belongs to us. And we continued with that, right? So because obviously a certain amount, a few castes went to college, the few castes read, they wrote, we read each other, and we all felt very pleased with ourselves. So yes, there's various kinds of gatekeeping happening, some people preferring men, some people preferring only a certain kind of writing irrespective of man or woman. So you feel even more you have to fit the bill, you have to write a certain way. So young writers often feel this enormous pressure of kind of purely imaginary pressure of the fact that they have to be a certain way. They also feel a certain pressure about the kind of personality they have to be, because increasingly writers are viewed as in some cases even bigger a product than the book itself, and therefore you have to be public, you have to have so many million followers, and in fact in some cases the wrong kind of gatekeeping is happening because somebody is being marketed for who they are, not for what they're writing. And so a lot of pathetic bad writing is floating around. Because you feel that it doesn't matter, we'll just sort of gloss it up and put it out there, but she's great, she has 3 million followers on Twitter, and this book will be a huge success, which is what we want. At the end of the day, we want to have a big meeting and we say, we sold so many books, we made so much money, wonderful. So yes, it's also a problem in the publishing world when one corporate publisher is buying up every other publisher in sight. What is that? There's a monolith, there's a huge kind of monster sitting there, owning everything, deciding everything. So that's automatically a kind of very scary level of control, because if you think of books as ideas, books as opinions, books, the getting out there, that one entity has the power to just, slam the brakes on so much. I'm not saying it, I don't want to make them sound like a kind of terrible, evil person from Star Wars or something, but it is a huge block, so yes, it's very worrisome, and that's where my heart rejoices for every single, sleepless independent who is trying to kind of chip away at that block, who is kind of letting other voices flow in, who's unafraid. Our targets are small, so we are braver, we are more foolhardy. We'll take the risks, we'll bring you in if you take a chance on us as well. So yes, it's very hard. You have to be very careful. And just, editorially, when I talk to my students at the Seagull School, and my only thing on sort of related to this issue is that when you start to edit, please remember, it's not a book you wrote, it's a book that somebody else wrote. So, you don't go into a text, all guns firing, trying to gatekeep in a certain way there as well, their style or their vocabulary, whatever it is, unless it's something, that sort of presents a moment for libel or something, that's a different issue. But you don't go in there and iron over everybody's uniqueness because it's not your book. So you treat the text, therefore you enable their voice rather than police it, So it's very, very important.
So now I'll move on to Seagull School of Publishing.
Now Bishan will speak and I will sit quietly.
So tell us more about, I was fascinated because there's, I believe there aren't any publishing schools, in Pakistan. So it really piqued my interest. So tell me more about your school, Seagull School of Publishing.
Okay. Well, we started about 10 years ago. This was also obviously Naveen's brainchild. I think he felt, and we all felt, that all the experience that we have gained over the years being in the publishing world, it's a good idea to share a lot of that to build the next generation of those publishing professionals. those young people who would be interested in joining the publishing world and making a difference. So that's how it started, I believe, and we've had really fantastic response. We did not know we didn't know what to expect, honestly, like with any new venture, but we've been overwhelmed by the very enthusiastic response from not just young people in India, but people outside India. From we've had students from 10, 12 different countries coming to India and physically attending classes over 3 months, coming to Calcutta and physically attending classes over 3 months, and and we thought we would perhaps be attracting young people starting their careers, but we've had students who are even 60 years old. So, or those in the middle age who would like to change their career path, who are dissatisfied with what they were doing, their corporate jobs or their banking jobs, uh, people wanting to open their own small publishing houses, independent publishing houses, which many students have done. So it's been a really interesting journey. And today we finished the session for 2021. Uh, it was a virtual session this time, obviously, for the pandemic. Uh, and we've had another, so now we're confident that another 28 people are going out into the world looking for opportunities in the publishing world and trying to make a difference. So that's a little bit about the school. Uh, yeah.
So what do you focus on? What are the subjects or the topics that the school focuses on?
Yeah. Although we would say that we primarily focus on editing books, but that's not what the course is about. The reason why I think this course is the course that the school offers is different is that we try to give as much of a wide, holistic view of the publishing world as possible. Uh, so that's because the way we work at Seagull is we because we're a small team, all of us does all kinds of things. I mean, I was perhaps hired as an editor, but I do so many different things, as I said earlier. Looking into production, looking into distribution, a bit of design, a bit of page setting, contracts, a bit of commissioning here and there. So that's a lot of, it's a very wide range of things. And we all do that. Like Sunandini does that. I have other colleagues who do that. We call ourselves editor. That's what we write at the bottom of our email. But actually we are doing a lot work of several departments in large publishing houses, right? A large publishing house would have like a legal department or a rights department or a production team, etc. But because we are small, we are all doing that. And actually that has made our understanding of the publishing world so much richer because we are ourselves doing so many different things. And that is something we wanted to pass on to all our students, which is why even though a lot of our classes are dedicated to nitty-gritties of editing, simply because we believe that most people joining the publishing industry at some level join as editors. So although we talk about that a lot in our classes, but every aspect of publishing is covered. Again, from promotion, publicity, production, printing press, what kind of paper, cover design, uh, rights management, buying rights, selling rights, translation. Uh, so the point is to give as a wide an understanding of the publishing world as possible, because once you have that, uh, if, whatever kind of company you join, or even if you're a freelancer, you have a much solid, a much more solid foundation, we believe, in the industry. So in terms of subjects, yes, we do a lot of editing, but as I said, all those other aspects of publishing are also covered.
So, and I'd like to ask this question to you as well as to Nandini. We know writing is a creative process, and as a published Sunandini, you said, you can spot somebody who's been to these workshops or these, taking classes and stuff. Is editing an acquired skill with, of course, creativity involved, because you cannot do without that?
I think you have to have a very, very solid and instinctive language skill, right? And by solid and instinctive, I mean, I can, if I sort of speak from personal experience, then yes, I did study English literature, for 5 years. I had a bachelor's degree, then I did a master's degree. But I was very, in retrospect, it wasn't a strategy, but just by various circumstances, I was the kind of person who was reading books from the moment I could read, my house was full of books. My parents encouraged, the habit. I lived in a neighborhood where I didn't have too many friends. So the easiest, constant companion in a generation before technology was entertainment, in quite the way in which it is now, I only read everything that I possibly could. And now I find myself very grateful for that, that sort of rock solid foundation, because that's not the kind of thing you can just pick up in a day. Right. And also for my sort of family being the family that it was. So, I had pulp fiction, I had detective fiction, I had cookbooks, I had books on dogs. My mother was a dog lover, I had my grandfather's books. My father had done a degree in English once upon a time. So I had his books. I just read everything. No one said it's not for you, so I had that, that sort of that sensitivity to different registers, to different styles of language. And that, I think, in fact, was sort of fine-honed when I did my literature degree, because I think what I mostly took away from my literature degree, I didn't really want to be an academic, was how to read, how to read, how to kind of deconstruct, and then how to put it back together again. So that, I think, is something, that kind of deep abiding connection with language, that kind of internalizing it, that is something that helps, right? And then there are some very clear, as I put it, sort of non-negotiable parts of editing, right? That you learn that, okay, this should be like rules of grammar, for example, spelling, when you italicize something, when you use a capital, all of that. Those things can be taught, they can be learned. Those parts have to marry the language part, because often if you're writing on behalf of your author, if you're enabling the story to come out more clearly, you have to be able to convincingly disguise yourself in that author's vocabulary. And that is territory that is beyond the nuts and bolts of, just grammar and spelling and so on. And that also, you have a language connection, and that you fine-hone over time. So some of it, yes, you can learn, in the classroom, you pick up, you become more aware of things to look out for. Because if you've been reading more or less well-edited books as you're growing up, you don't notice these. So you think that they're automatically, right? But yes, we clean up the text, we fix all the smaller things. Sometimes we fix some really big things. And if we've done it well, then you won't notice it, which is the whole point of editing. And that can only come through experience. You can't start off, as a great editor. You can become a really good or great editor, but you can't begin there. So it's partly learned, and you have to keep practicing it. Every book you do, you figure out something new. Sometimes you just figure out when not to edit, because even that is something that you should know, that not all books require a certain kind of heavy-handed editing. So you learn, I think you sort of learn the basics, and then if you keep at it and you do as, sort of wide a variety of books as you can, if you're lucky, then you find 5 years, 10 years, 11 years down the line, you're more confident, because initially all of us have been through a phase when you worry, should I edit? Should I edit? Am I editing too much? Am I just cutting out too much? Oh my God, no, no, no. You kind of have, so the confidence comes, that also comes through experience, but you can definitely pick up some of the very basics that also contribute to actually just good, clean writing, which many people take for granted, but they don't know.
Do you have anything to add to that, Bishan?
Well, I mean, like any other profession, you need practice. You need to be working in the field for a while. I sometimes look back at things I did like 10 years ago, and I would be like, why did I do that? Why was I fighting with that author for absolutely no reason? So maybe 10 years later, I'll look at 2020 and think like that, 2021 and think like that. So yeah, like any other job, you learn a lot on the job. I mean, the students at the Seagull School at least have a training going on for some kind of a training going on for 3 months. We didn't, right?
Yeah.
So whatever we did, whatever we learned absolutely. I mean, on the job. We had no training. We apart from loving books, we really didn't have anything else to go on.
I think that's more or less my story as well. And the editing bit, I even go back to my articles that I've written actually on the website. And if I read and if I don't like something, I have this habit of updating that. So it's a bad habit of mine. It's like a secret thing that I do. But yeah, I think practice is essential. To hone and carve. Like in Urdu we say tarashna. Tarash ke nikalna. Sculpting out our skills. I think that's really important. So we're at the end of a session. Any last words from all three of you, hopefully?
Naveen hasn't said anything in a very long time.
Yes.
Yes,
So
I'm sure you can speak for all of us.
Naveen is like totally zoned out. Naveen, hello.
I'm fascinated by listening to both of you.
Well, you listen to us all day.
Not really. Not in this kind of objective audience listening. We're welcoming somebody from Seattle just now, as I can see, a bit late.
Rick.
Rick Simonson, world's greatest bookseller.
That's true.
Yeah, no, I think it's perfect. I mean, you've covered a lot of interesting philosophical points about publishing and about teaching and about different ways of being both editor and not just being editor, but being all those other wonderful things, because it's very easy to be in little compartments, which is what happens. It happens to our students. We now have over 260 alumni, and a lot of them in the beginning would go and instinctively in their new jobs would say, oh, but at Seagull, and then they had to be shushed that, it's a whole different thing. But what they do bring is a certain ability to manage crisis, because often, in your role as a one segregated something, a problem may arise and you may have a solution because you've learned the tip of it in a certain way. Because in a 3-month course, you can't just be, it's as we said, as Rami said earlier, it sort of just about prepares that it's a very nascent thing. And then you find honed skills as you in jobs, the style of the house that you're working for, and so on and so forth. And yeah, the publishing school, I think, is unique only also because it's, there are university courses and so on and so forth, but this is a kind of hands-on course that is tailor-made for that 20, 24, 30 people each time. In other words, it's different depending on the mix. Within a week, Sunandini and Bishan tend to suss out who somebody may want little interest poetry or a graphic novel or some different aspects. Then you have a core teaching structure, but then you bring in those experts from all over the world because that's important to do. And so, which is why there are no handouts. There's you can't just, you miss a lecture, you catch up with your colleagues, because in some ways it's an improvisation like this conversation. So each teaching class, that two of them and all the others that we invite is unique to that particular session. And then the interaction with the students then makes it even more interesting, right? So it's not like a handbook that you're teaching. You could also do that. I think that's really it. We could carry on endlessly.
Bishan?
Well, I mean, all I want to say is that now that our classes are happening in the virtual world, so anybody watching, anybody wants to join our school in 2022, please write into us. And you
Yes,
can do it from anywhere in the world.
I might be doing that.
Excellent.
It
Perfect.
could be anywhere, and
Yeah, that's the
that's
great
the-
advantage.
it's it's one of, in a very sort of it's one positive that's come out of the pandemic, that it's pushed us to move the course online and open it up to everyone. You don't have to come all the way to Calcutta. You can be wherever you are and still take part in this sort of, it does become an incredible experience by the end of it. So yes, if there's anyone watching and you want to take part, then just write into us. You can Google the Seagull School and you find us. We're also on Facebook. So just email us. Yeah.
I'll be posting the name, the website address with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it's accessible. And by accessible, that's why I'm so happy about the digital realm, because it has provided access to so many, with gadgets, with mobile phones, smartphones.
Yeah.
So it's and it's not just urban areas, it's rural areas as well. And this access has given such immense learning and opportunity.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Sunandini, Bishan, and Naveen.
Thank you for having us.
It has been an immense pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.